it's just kind of hit me that, wow, people are really talking about this. It's affected me.
It has become more and more and more of a problem.
It's a little bit more sinister. It's basically a form of cyber attack on the aircraft.
It's probably at the top of the list of dangerous things that can happen to an airline pilot is when you start to ignore warnings.
And it can be dangerous. It's already been dangerous, hasn't it? It can kill.
Hi everybody and very welcome back to yet another episode of Captains Speaking. My name is Peter Hörnfeldt and I'm here as always together with...
Me, Ben Watts. How are you doing?
I'm great, man. It's so much work. There's so much things to do, especially now as we're getting closer to summer,
You've had a busy week, huh?
Yeah, I mean it is busy now. We are creating a lot of different content for all the channels, and now we have this our third channel and our new podcast, which is so great. I really enjoy. I didn't think that I would enjoy as much to do these unscripted things, but it just feels like such a pleasure. To be just speaking with a fellow pilot and just discussing these things in a non-scripted, very very laid back and real way,
Yeah, obviously having done a bit of work now with Mentour now and doing the scripting, that's fun. But this is just another level. It's great. Doesn't really feel like we're doing any work. It's just chatting away with a mate, isn't it? Really.
Exactly. This is what we always do anyway. So we might as well record it. So what about you? How's your week?
It's been good. It's been busy, but good busy. So I've had just come off 5 days of work, but it's been a really nice mix of bit of teaching in the sim and a bit of flying. And some of the flying I've done has just been regular flying, so no instructing. So it's been a really nice mix of simulating flying and just regular flying as well, which has been good. Yeah,
see, that's the thing. I don't like when I was flying full time. There was really not much mixed of normal flying in there. And for those of you who don't really understand what that means, when you're instructing, it's a different type of flying, isn't it?
It is.
When you're in your instructor role in the cockpit, you are switched on 100% all the time. So that when it's not like we're not switched on otherwise, but we have to utilize all of the time. So when there's some dead time, well, then you utilize that to instruct the student. You have some discussion items. You have some, what ifs and how would you deal with this? And this is how I would deal with this. So you're constantly working.
Yeah, it's a much busier day. And at the end of the day, there's more paperwork, there's debriefs. And it's great. Don't get me wrong. I love instructing. But the workload, obviously, as a line trainer, when you're instructing on the line, is obviously significantly more, to the point that when you do just go flying, it feels just like a bit of a jolly out, to be honest. It's
I know,
it's quite nice.
That's exactly how I remember it as well, because not only are you don't have those extra stuff that you need to do, but also you're normally flying with a pretty senior, experienced first officer who have maybe years of experience behind them. And that just means that instead of you having to tell them, all right, maybe we should start our briefing now, or have you thought about maybe doing this? They just do it. So it really feels like cheating almost. Like it's when you do a lot of instructing, that's how it feels.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it was a long day yesterday, but it was just a regular day out, and I really enjoyed it. You kind of find you really enjoy the flying side of it when you come and just do a regular day of line flying. It's like, this is awesome. This is why I got into the job.
Yeah,
it's good.
But that is it. Because flying is pleasurous. Like it is hard work, especially when you get up in the morning, like when the clock goes off at 3:15 in the morning or something and you have to get up. That's hard. That's not easy. But once you sit there, you've done your first takeoff and you're climbing out and you've gotten a long climb clearance and you have your cup of coffee with you.
Yeah.
It is pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's pretty, a few times today I remember climbing out of a few places, I don't know, sunsets or sunrises, whatever it was, and you're thinking, actually, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I miss the most from not flying. That I'm looking forward to when I get back into the cockpit for those things. So absolutely. And what kind of training have you been doing in the cockpit?
So mainly command upgrade, actually. So I've been sitting in the right seat for the day. So I've been training new or senior FOs who are now going in to become a captain. They've done all of their ground, they've done all the selection, the ground school, the sim training, and now they're in the left seat of the aircraft and just learning to be a commander, making those command decisions, managing the operation. And I'm in the right seat, just guiding them through that, really. They know how to fly at that point. Obviously, they know the SOPs. is now just taking that more managerial, big picture role and getting them settled into that left seat.
Yeah, I remembered. I mean, that training from the onset, when people look at it, it should be easy training. You're dealing with someone who's been studying hard, who has been preparing, who has the experience and everything. So on paper, that should be pretty easy training. But in reality, it is actually one of the most hard trainings you do, because you have to play 3 different roles. Like
You do.
you're the first officer.
Yeah.
You are the commander, but you can't act as the commander because that's what they are about to learn. And well, so that's 2 roles,
Yeah,
isn't
then
it?
you're the instructor as well, aren't you?
And then you're
Yeah.
the instructor, exactly. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I remember that being, because if you take too much room, then they don't learn anything.
No.
So you have to sit there. Basically, I remember sitting on my hands
Yeah.
and kind of jumping up and down. And like, oh, you should really be doing this now, but you can't tell them because they have to realize that. And I remember distinctively that after they do about 30 sectors of training ish, as I remember it. And I remember after about sector 15, that's when they stop asking you what to do and start telling you what to do.
Yeah.
And when they make that switch, it's so clear when it happens. It's like, yep, now this person is starting to think like a commander. It's starting to take control of the situation and take initiatives and doing stuff. But up until then, they're basically first officers in the left-hand seat.
Yeah, and you're kind of willing them, aren't you? Sometimes when you're seeing in these scenarios, there's a problem in the cabin on the turnaround, and you're kind of itching to just go and do it, aren't you? And that's something I found difficult, particularly at first. But then sometimes you might just drop a bit of an open question, a little bit of a hint. Anything we should be thinking about here with this passenger? And they're like, oh yeah, we need to whatever. But yeah, they start to take more of the initiative, and that's great to see, because that's what we're aiming to do. But it's actually me flying over the last week, and generally doing more flying than I have done historically now over the last few weeks. This kind of leads us nicely into our first main story of this week, which is going to be GPS spoofing and how it affects us operationally. But we'll have a talk about that after the break. Right. Okay. So back into today's very first story, Petter. And I thought this is something that I've noticed. I think it's a bit like maybe when you haven't seen someone's child growing up for a while, you haven't seen him for a while. When you see him again, you're like, wow, you've grown. Kind of a bit like me with this spoofing. I haven't flown that much because I've been so busy in the sim. But recently I've been out flying more, and it's just kind of hit me that, wow, people are really talking about this. It's affected me. Not massively, but it has, but also hearing other aircraft reporting it. So I thought it'd be a great topic to kind of dive into and explore a little bit more about. So GPS spoofing, something that's been around for a while, but maybe only more sort of in the news recently. But do you want to just explain a little bit about what that is?
Absolutely. So just similar to you, I kind of, I took a break from flying just as this was beginning. So it was not really an issue for me, but I've been covering it extensively on Mentour now because it has become more and more and more of a problem. And I think there's been a huge rise with specifically both spoofing and jamming, which are 2 related but different things. So if we start with jamming, jamming is what it sounds like. It's normally there's a transmitter on the ground that sends out a signal that is very similar to the signals that our GPS receivers gets from the satellites. So by doing that, the receiver is now receiving different signals, and they're similar to each other. So it doesn't know what to do, so it stops functioning. Essentially, that's the layman explanation of it. Obviously, it's much more advanced than that if you go into the details of it, but it is just jamming out the signal. So the GPS receivers, we normally have 2 on board. They don't work anymore, and they tell us GPS in up, GPS left in up, GPS right in up, and then we don't have that navigational system available.
No.
And what's the difference between jamming and spoofing then?
So spoofing, so as you said, jamming's been around for a while, but the spoofing now is where it's a little bit more sinister. It's basically a form of cyber attack on the aircraft. And what it does is it will send signals up that are very, very similar to the GPS signals it's receiving from the satellites that are in range. And there's very clever ways that it can mimic them. So first it will kind of just put a slightly stronger signal in there and gradually ramp that up. so that it almost takes control of the satellite signal in the way that the aircraft is receiving it. And once it's done that, it will then start sending it erroneous information. It will start sending it erroneous data that will now make the GPS think that this signal is correct because it's gradually taken it from the GPS to the spoofing ground station, but then start giving it this false data, which now tells it that it can be anywhere. It could be 60 miles, 80 miles away from wherever you actually are, higher, lower, which really plays absolute havoc with the aircraft systems.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, what's the reason for this? Why is it increasing?
Yeah, I mean, mainly it's a defense, the spoofing here, because the world is in conflict in a lot of places, isn't it? And a lot of the attacks are being done by drones, which are GPS based. So a form of defense of that is to cyber attack these drones to make them go off target. Effectively, that's what it's designed to do, to make sure the drones don't hit their target. But there's no events I know where aircraft have been deliberately targeted, but an unwanted side effect of that, if aircraft operating anywhere near that area, anywhere near where these conflict zones are, aircraft can get picked up and, spoofed by this same signal.
Yeah.
And it's happening more and more.
So what kind of hotspots have you seen? Have you noticed it? Like, you were flying this week.
So when was it last? I think last week I was over in Helsinki, which is obviously only 60, 70 miles away from the Russian border. You get a lot of it over there. Anywhere near the Baltic states, anywhere near Ukraine, you're generally going into that hotspot, that Polish airspace. You're kind of ready for it. Now, a lot of airlines will have mitigating strategies in place. They'll have spoofing checklists that you can action or pre-brief to kind of anticipate this, and then have a plan in place should it happen. But yeah, we're seeing more and more of it. And I was flying this week actually, and I lost a GPS, which is not massively major. It came back eventually, but throughout the week I've heard multiple aircraft saying they've been spoofed, and one particular was a bizjet going into Bremen. We heard them on the same frequency saying, look, we've been flying for 2 hours, we were spoofed wherever they were coming from, and the problem hasn't gone away even though they're back into normal airspace. It's kind of just affected all of the systems, so they're getting a variety of warnings, and the warnings can be really, really strange in the sense that you might be up at the cruise at 37,000 feet, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you'll get like a whoop whoop pull up, which, and why it's so troublesome is that as pilots, whenever you hear that, we're trained without thinking to go into that maneuver, aren't we? Into the terrain avoidance maneuver.
Yeah, no, I've seen there's actually quite a few YouTube videos out there showing pilots who are recording this, and obviously when you're 37,000 feet, we know where we are, and there's no mountain that high, so you can, even though you might feel like you want to do the muscle memory movement, you're not going to do a pull up at 37,000 feet.
No.
But the problem, the problem becomes. There's a couple of problems here, actually. First problem is if this happens at lower altitude while you're in the clouds and there is actually terrain around. Like now, you might have made a navigational mistake. There might have been, you might have made a mistake. It might not be a spoofing. So then you're going to have to assume that the warning is correct, because the one warning that you do not want to ignore is a terrain pull-up warning from the GPWS. Like,
no chance.
No.
Yeah. So we've gone. There's different kind of realms of airspace where we treat this slightly differently. In the sense that if you're in the cruise, of course it's going to be erroneous. You're up at 37,000 feet. But when you start getting to that realm where we're below what we call the MSA, or the minimum en route altitude or minimum off route altitude, basically when you're below that altitude, there could be terrain. There genuinely could be terrain. So we have to respect it. We can't. It becomes a lesser of the two evils. Yes, it's likely to be spoofing, but we've got to respect it. Yeah. But this kind of opens up some really interesting side effects, because now you're getting aircraft that are relatively low level that are now being spoofed. They correctly go and do the terrain avoidance maneuver, which ultimately involves applying full power, pitching the aircraft up to a very steep climb angle to give yourself your best angle of climb. And now you've got these aircraft in congested airspace in very high energy states, massive rates of climb, which opens up other problems like gas, like where you avoiding other aircraft that you would never be near normally. No. But you're climbing with such a high rate that now this becomes another problem.
Yeah, and the follow-up problem then, when this has started to happen a couple of times, is when you stop trusting your warning systems. right?
Yeah.
This is something that it's probably at the top of the list of dangerous things that can happen to an airline pilot is when you start to ignore warnings. Because once you start ignoring the warnings, once you think, I'm sure it's going to be fine, that's just another spoofing incident, well, then now that warning system is effectively useless.
Yeah, and it becomes a case of the like the boy who cried wolf, isn't it? You know, and it can kill. You know, if we just treat it, oh yeah, it's just another spoofing event, it's fine. I had it here yesterday as well, but you've set the wrong QNH pressure setting that day. You are slightly off where you were before, and it is a real event. You know, it's only going to end one way, and it can be dangerous. It's already been dangerous, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing. We probably have seen the first accident where spoofing and jamming was a direct contributor to it, and that was, of course, Bajan Airlines flight 8243 that flew into Russia. I think it was going from Baku to Grozny airport in Russia, and they actually reported that they had jamming and spoofing problems about 40 minutes into the flight, and then they continued to their destination, and at the time that they were coming in for landing, there was actually a drone attack in the area of that airport. So the Ukrainian forces were sending in drones towards this Russian airport or in the area around. So the Russian air defense was working with that, and we don't know. We don't know exactly what happened yet. I don't think the final report is out yet because this happened on the 25th of December 2024, Christmas Day.
Yeah.
But in any case, as they were on approach, they were impacted by something, shrapnel, most likely a surface-to-air missile, and which severely damaged the aircraft. And it was foggy on the ground as well, so it was bad weather. They requested a diversion. They were still being spoofed and still being jammed as they were diverting out of the Caspian Sea. And eventually they diverted to what was it? To Kazakhstan, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, to Kazakhstan, to Aktau Airport, and
Yeah.
the pilots, from what we can see, made an absolutely heroic effect.
Yeah.
They controlled this aircraft without hydraulics systems, without flight control systems, without an absolutely heroic effort, and managed to get this stricken bird down onto the airport perimeter.
Yeah.
But they couldn't control it during landing, so it did crash, and out of the 67 people on board, I think 29 survived.
Yeah.
Which would have to be said to be, a relatively good outcome from something like that, but an absolute horrific tragedy, obviously.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. They did a sterling job.
Yeah. So that is, I mean, in this case, spoofing was a direct contributor to the to it. So we can't go around and say that this is not dangerous. And I think it's really sad because, like we said in our last episode, which, by the way, I hope that you've checked out, GPS approaches, GNSS approaches, and so on, RMP approaches, that's really one of the few technical changes and innovations that we've seen during my whole career. That's the last 23 years or so.
Yeah.
And the reason that they have been good is because they allow smaller airports to have good semi-precision approaches, really well constructed, easy to fly approaches that doesn't need any expensive nav aids on the ground or expensive installations. So they were a really, really good thing when they came.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're talking about this actually with a guy I was training this week, and talking about one of the things we have to sign off is either a visual approach, but we do circling approaches as well in the sim, which is where you fly an instrument approach to one runway, level off, kind of break off the approach and fly all the way around and land on the reciprocal. And yeah, I used to do them relatively regularly on the line, but you just don't really do them anymore because there's so many airports now that couldn't afford or didn't warrant having an instrument approach on the other end. So we had to do the circle when the wind was favoring that runway. Now they've just got an RNP approach.
Yeah.
So we don't have to do them. But now this spoofing is coming into play more and more, and it's really shown a limitation of this GPS and the accuracy that it gives. It's kind of undermining a lot of this now.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I find it sad because I thought it was a really good, if it would have just been left alone, and if no one were to be tampering with the system, it was really good. It brought you down exactly where you're supposed to, just like an ILS approach.
Yeah.
Super, super convenient to fly, safe. And as you said, I mean, these circling approaches, we have to do them every 6 months in the sim for a reason, because they are complicated maneuvers. It's easy to make mistakes on them.
Yeah.
So, to have something that can give you the opportunity to fly a different type of approach that is much safer, much better, that was a really good thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's so much better in every way. It's easier and simpler for us. It's more, a fuel efficient because we're saving fuel, less noise because we're not dragging this airplane around low level. But yeah, it's a shame. It's this. I don't think this spoofing is going anywhere soon,
No.
and it's only probably going to get worse. But you might think, okay, what do we do with it? Well, we do have the ability to deselect GPS from our flight management computer. So if there is definite spoofing happening, we can sometimes preempt that and go and actually, know what, we're going to turn it off. Because when I used to fly the 737-300 years ago, it didn't even have GPS. Which sounds really old, but we used to rely on the IRSs, which are the inbuilt like gyros and accelerometers that very cleverly work out where we are in conjunction with, getting crosscuts from navigation aids and so on. And it will basically go back to that. So what I was doing every day in the 737-300 is basically what we would now go back to if we know it's going to happen. But the problem is that if we have been spoofed, it can corrupt the system until it does a hard reset on the ground. That's the problem. So
yeah, I mean that's the thing. Actually, talking about that, I remember we were flying out of Girona, Barcelona. In the beginning, I was still a first officer at the time, and we were flying up to London, Stansted, and we had a lightning strike over the Pyrenees. Right, and normally lightning strikes, it's not a big deal, right? But this time, it corrupted our only flight management computer. So we only had one FMC at the time. We didn't have two.
Yeah.
So the FMC was just gone. It just gave up. Right? And then what you have to do is you have to go back in the 737-800, you have to go back to conventional navigation, right? So you talked about the IRSs, which is a really good inertial reference system, navigation system, but we couldn't even use that because the FMC was gone. So we had to go back to actually flying on navigational aids, which is what we practiced doing our training, so it wasn't a big deal. Now, the 737-800 is not built for that because you have screens. Normally, when you fly smaller aircraft, you can cross-check different instruments, and they're pretty close to each other. But on the 800, you have screens on one side, screens on another, and if you want to cross-navigate, you have to kind of look across the cockpit to do it, right? So it's not fantastic. But anyway, we flew, and obviously the air traffic control provided us with radar vectors and things like that. So it's not a big deal. But when we got closer to London, when you come into the London airspace, you start to have things like, okay, we need you to descend flight level 290 to level 20 miles before Laurel, or something like that.
Yeah.
And now it starts to become a little bit more of an issue for lazy MD pilots, like who's only been flying with an FMC telling us what to do. So we thought, we're just going to tell London Control that we are negative RNAV. And hopefully they will just take care of us and give us radar vectors towards the ILS, and that's going to be fine. Not so much. You're like, okay, copy it, negative RNAV, follow the arrival procedure, which had all of those things in it. And I could almost hear, because we had, in the company I worked for, we had 737-200s at the time, which were really, like that's the Jurassic 737.
Yeah.
And obviously they didn't have, like if they had a GPS, it was just a GPS box that they had somewhere in the cockpit to check out where they were-ish. They were flying always on conventional navigation. So I could almost hear them laughing when we came in there with our flashy 737-800 and like, negative RNAV, help us out. And like,
welcome to our world. Yeah.
So that obviously is as a last defense, you can always go down to doing that. But like you said, there is a problem with the IRS system board, and that is that the IRS system, which are laser gyros, it has a tendency to wander over time. Right? So there will be a small navigational error in the beginning, and then as you progress over time, that becomes larger and larger due to several different things, right, inside of the systems. It's not perfect. But the way that it's been built is that it self-corrects itself using the GPS. So if you're not quick enough when you are being spoofed or jammed and you turn off the GPS updating, it will take those spoofed signals and correct the IRS signals.
Yeah.
And this is what you were referring to, as in it,
Yeah.
like then the whole system is basically not working. None of the parts are working. They're showing crazy stuff, and it will not get better until you are down on the ground and can do a reset of it.
Yeah, that's it. And that's the kind of the worst case, because unlike maybe in your car or your phone where you just navigate solely by GPS, even though we have GPS and it is by far the most accurate source of nav data we don't necessarily navigate just by that. The onboard systems take all sources of navigation data and then use a hierarchy system to prioritize and correct. So yes, it uses GPS and takes that primarily, but it will also use the IRSs, it will use navigation aids on the ground, and then calculate a position based on that. But you're basically, when you're spoofed, you're infecting the rest of the system. Yeah. And it will then, need that hard reset. And I know people sort of said to me, well, why can't we just, surely if you've got RAIM, that receiver autonomous information monitoring, which is where the onboard systems, they look for erroneous data. So if you've got a minimum of 5 satellites, if one of them is giving something, it will kind of compare all of them and go, that one there is not right. And it's got enough data to go, that one is not right. And it will kind of just disregard that satellite. And that in an ideal world, that would work. But with spoofing, it mimics all of the satellites. So the RAIM, the onboard monitoring system that we have, just doesn't really protect you against that. So we're kind of very exposed to this, and it's an ongoing problem. It'd be interesting to see what long-term solutions there are, because, like I said, I don't think this is going anywhere fast.
No, but I mean, surely we have to have. There must be some way of encrypting the signal.
Yeah. Yeah, I read about that actually. That was you hit the nail on the head, because apparently there's a way that's already existing apparently where there's unique encryption keys that the satellite will use. That's also a bit like you have an authenticator on your phone. It will then, the receiver uses the same key. It's the exact same key to unlock the signal, but it's limited between the receiver and the communicator and can't have a third party in it apparently. So that, I'm sure, is probably somewhere where we're going to end up going.
Yeah, I think so. There's also, I've made a video about a new system that's similar to the IRS system that uses quantum mechanics to actually to create an onboard system that doesn't require any outside sources whatsoever, but can be much more precise and doesn't have the wonder, doesn't have the faults that the IRS system have that's being produced. Yeah. And obviously this is, it's always best to have something that is contained inside of the aircraft itself. Because anytime in the age that we live in today, anytime that you take in signals from outside in any way, shape or form, there's a chance of some kind of interruption to it or some kind of interference with it. Yep. And I read this, or actually I saw this YouTube video, which was among the most frightening things that I've seen this year, I think. And it was from a hacker symposium, right? Yeah. And these hacker symposiums, then you sit down these super, super smart kids, they're in their early 20s, all of them, and they basically give each other like dares. I bet you cannot do this, or I bet you cannot do that, or whatever. And one of them had been to hack the TCAS system. Oh. Right, hack an aircraft TCAS system in flight. And these guys, this group, sat down and over 35 minutes explained how they had successfully managed to use a ground station to hack the TCAS system of a flying aircraft to the extent that it could create intruders, fake intruders. It could create whatever was needed in order to get the aircraft to do a TCAS resolution advisory. And they could do so within a cone of a sort, because the problem they had was the latency of the signals and stuff. Yep. But they had solved it. So, I watched that. And I was thinking, like, is there nothing sacred? Why would you do this? But of course, because they could. Yeah. So I was just thinking, like, okay, so this is now going to be the next frontier of things that we are going to have to try to safeguard to make sure that no one comes in and suddenly puts up a 737 in front of me on my TCAS screen. Yeah. But then it's these kind of conflicts, and it is a form of conflict that always prompt innovation, isn't it? If you look at like the aircraft development during the Second World War and shortly after, it was exponential, wasn't it? And I think we're in another realm of that now, but in a much more digital age. No, absolutely. And of course, these were white hat white hat hackers, which means
Yeah.
that they did this for that purpose.
Yeah.
Because they had, as part of this presentation, they said also we have contacted EASA, we've contacted the FAA, we've shown them these are the weaknesses, this is what we can do, make sure that people know about it. Now, I've never heard of this. I've never heard of anyone actually being subjected to this, but it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
So it's scary shit.
Yeah. What can you trust?
And then on that bombshell, it's time for a little break. And after we get back from that break, we are going to talk about Qatar canceling their 737 MAX 10 orders that they had without anyone knowing it. So when we come back from the break, that's what we're going to talk about.
Cool.
Okay, so the next big story. And this is it is a big story, and it isn't a big story, depending on how you see it. But we all heard that when Trump went to the Middle East and went to Qatar, they unveiled this massive order for Boeing 777Xs and Boeing 787. So the long-haul aircraft, basically. Huge, major order. But no one really noticed was that they also cancelled an order that they had for 50 Boeing 737 MAX 10s that they had made. And the reason I want to talk about that is because we are in a situation right now where there's a huge backlog on both Airbus and Boeing side when it comes to short to medium haul single aisle aircraft.
Yeah.
So the reason that they canceled this order, which by the way, I think no one in the industry actually thought would actually come to pass anyway, because if the background was that, I don't know if you remember, but about 2022, there was a big spat between Qatar Airways and Airbus.
Yeah.
Where Qatar Airways had bought these Airbus A350s, and the paint started peeling off on the wings and the bodies, and it looked terrible.
Yeah.
It really looked terrible. And Airbus had looked into it. They assured that there was no safety implications of this, but it had to do with the compounds that they were building the aircraft from, that the paint just didn't stick well to them. But the paint actually serves some roles. It actually uses there's a little bit of a mesh in the paint that leads things like lightning strikes to make sure, because since it's not metal, when they're made out of carbon fiber, you need to have a mesh of something to lead lightning strikes. So Qatar was saying, well, we actually think that there is a safety implication here, going forth and back. And as a result of that, Qatar started refusing taking their Airbus A350s. Like, they wouldn't take them from factory at Airbus until this had been sorted out. And Airbus saw that as a breach of contract. So they say, well, you're not taking the orders that you have. We are not going to proceed with the order of these Airbus A321neos that you have ordered. Right? We're going to cancel that. And in what I think was probably the world's quickest negotiation, it literally took a weekend. Once Airbus had announced that they were canceling the orders, it took a weekend, and the following week, Qatar came back and said that they had bought 50 737 MAX 10s, 25 firm orders and 25 on options. So there was always going to be a little bit of a question mark around these orders. But there is a lot of demand for these 737s.
Massively so. Yeah.
And now, basically, the 737, the way that Qatar seems to be moving is they're starting to phase out their 737 MAXs on their short to medium haul side, the single aisles. Now they're best friends with Airbus again, because now everything is sorted out. So now that order that they had with Airbus is back on again for the A321. I think they're LRs and they're Neos anyway.
Yeah, Neos. Yeah.
So now this is cancelled. But how is that going to affect Boeing, you think? Do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a massive impact to Boeing, to be honest. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, there's a huge backlog. People want these aircraft, so I'm sure they can easily redirect those orders to someone who'll be rubbing their hands and going, yep, I'll take them from you, I'm sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think, because there are several interesting things here. The fact that they kind of just put it under the rug. Like I think there's no one that's really mentioned this, but the fact is that, generally speaking, when you make an order, you also pay a down payment. Right? You pay a down payment. It's a small part. It's a couple of percent, might be 10%. I don't know. Someone out there can probably correct me on this, but it's a small down payment when you make the order, and then you pay the bulk of the money once the aircraft are delivered. But that also means that if you cancel orders, if you cancel 25 firm orders, there's a lot of down payment there, millions of dollars. But of course, here they also made the biggest single order in the world up until now for long-haul aircraft.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that there was probably a little bit of wiggling there.
Sure.
I think that they could probably transfer
Sure.
that money over.
Yeah.
But it's interesting in a different way, and that's because, like you said, there's a lot of demand for these Maxes. And in fact, what we're seeing in Europe at the moment is that the airfares are going up.
Yeah.
Like the ticket prices are becoming higher, and that is in part because people are still traveling in Europe at a large amount. But the other thing is that these Maxes that the airlines had calculated with getting. These Maxes are much more efficient, and they were part of the fleet strategy of a lot of especially low-fare airlines in Europe. They're just not coming at the same rate as they should. And when that happens, it means that there's less aircraft, which means that there are less flights. And when you have the supply going down and the demand stays the same, the price goes up.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that, which means that something like this could potentially help a little bit, maybe reduce the time to wait at least a bit.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I wanted, and this is actually a slightly different thing, but it's part of the same big story, is that Boeing are now, it seems like they've gotten their stuff together.
Yeah.
Because they started the year, and especially the end of last year, with an abysmal production rate of 737s. Like they were in their low single digits some months, and they come up to around 20 some month, but they were nowhere near the FAA's cap of 38 per month. But the new CEO has been working on making sure that the supply chain is tested and that the factories are checked and run properly. And now they're actually up to the FAA limit of 38.
Nice.
Yeah. And that is a huge deal, especially when it comes to these delivery times. Because yes, Qatar Airways, they canceled 25 firm orders. But when they're up to 38 in production rate per month, that just means a month and a half,
Yeah.
Or even only if you only check the 25, it's less than a month.
Yeah.
So this is actually the really big news now that people should be looking at. It's the fact that Boeing seems to have gotten their stuff together. And if that's the case, then they will probably work with this limit at 38 per month for a while to demonstrate to the FAA that they can actually do this safely and controlled. And then I'm guessing that they're hoping that the FAA is going to lift that limit. So that they can start producing, because they're now talking about opening up yet another 737 line so that they can increase it further.
Well, yeah.
And that would be a big deal for Boeing.
Yeah, it would be. It'd be a massive opener, wouldn't it? Because there's so many airlines waiting for these aircraft to come in that are restricting schedules. That if they can just open the floodgates and let these aircraft out, it's going to massively help these airlines and get the world moving. But I mean, what's interesting as well, I think, from Qatar's perspective, is if they've gone max to start with, for their short haul. That was a relatively new thing, wasn't it, for Qatar, because they've always been long haul, wide body. And they've got all the training infrastructure now for the Maxes, got the crew qualified, the engineers qualified, but now to phase that out to the Airbus now, that's a big. I mean, no one really talks about it, but that's a big deal. That's a big thing to change.
But it's also interesting because Qatar Airways, they have every single long haul aircraft there is. I think they're like 737. Sorry. Boeing 787s, they've got Airbus A350s, they got Airbus A380s, and now they're getting Boeing 777Xs.
Yeah.
So on the training side, they're obviously not caring much about having different fleets and having different training departments and SOPs and everything. And it's interesting that they go down that way, because if you look at the really successful low-fare airlines around the world, they are very strict on staying in at least one type.
It just massively works, doesn't it? It from all the little day-to-day bits and bobs. Like if you say you're taking an aircraft up to Stansted, for example, and you go tech, They can call any crew off standby, to go and fix, if you run out of hours or whatever it might be, to come and fly your airplane back or to fly another airplane back with your passengers. But if you are Airbus 320 and I'm 73, can't do that anymore.
No, that it creates a lot of different potential problems. But in this case, I guess they have thought that it's worth it. And there's also the fact is that different types will have different specialities.
Yeah.
So if you're in the Middle East, for example, it's one of the few places where you can have an Airbus A380 and working and having it at making money. So it makes sense that they have that, for example, on London routes.
Yes.
Where you are where you have a lot of very expensive slots in Heathrow, for example. So what you want is to do few movements with carrying a lot of passengers. The Airbus A380 makes sense then.
Does.
This was the reason that it was created in the first place, because Airbus made a bet to think that we are going to see more and more of these hub airports. So there's going to be less slots, so we need bigger aircraft. But then what happened was the point-to-point system took over, which is where the Airbus A350 and the Boeing 787 excels.
Yes.
So if you are an airline that flies a lot of different types of networks, which Qatar does, then maybe it makes sense to have a lot of different types as well. And on a personal note, I just love flying with them. I mean, I've been flying with them, and this, by the way, we're not sponsored by them. This is just me saying that I've been flying as a passenger with them, and it's a very, very nice. They have a very good customer service. Everything runs super smoothly.
Nice.
And it's going to be super interesting to see now, because they're getting a new competitor, Riyadh.
Yes, of course.
Riyadh Air is opening up. So it will be very, very interesting to see how Qatar reacts to that. I've already seen some quite snappy advertisements that they've done. They're starting to poke at each other. So it's gonna be interesting. Now I hope that we're gonna see a good old-fashioned price war, because I would love to be able to fly in, with the kind of service and quality that they both will presumably have for lower fares. That would be nice.
That's a win.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. No, I just thought it was interesting, so I wanted to bring it up.
Yes, interesting. And are they? Do you know? Are they phasing out the Maxes completely, or are they keeping a split fleet?
As far as I understand it, they're taking away the Maxes. I think they're flying 77 Max 8s at the moment, and the reason they got them was because S7 Airlines in Russia were supposed to get those, and they couldn't, obviously, because of the sanctions against Russia. So I think they got a good deal on leasing them, I assume. And now they're just, I know as soon as the Airbuses start arriving, which they will probably do in 1 or 2 years or so, I think they're going to start to phase out the Maxes.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. Right. So we are going to take a very quick break. And when we're back from that break, we're going to take some of your questions. So stay around. Okay, Ben. So as always, we have asked, in this case, our Patreon crew, because they were the first ones to see the first episode of Captain Speaking. So we asked them to ask some questions about anything, really.
Yeah.
It could be personal. I don't encourage that, but it could be. But it could also be about, questions that people might have had about Mentor Now or Mentor Pilot videos, or something that you've said on your Instagram page, Airline Pilot Performance, or it could be just general about aviation. Yeah. So the thing to remember here is that we have not seen these questions, so we have not been able to prepare for them.
Nope.
And so what you will get is just our spontaneous reaction to them.
Let's go.
You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the first question comes from our Patreon, Kevin. This is actually relating to our previous episode, I think.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on having the lead flight attendant trained in a simulator on basic flight controls, so that they could be able to take control in case of a pilot incapacitation when the other pilot isn't in the flight deck? I understand that this would present safety and economic challenges, but would overcoming these challenges be too unfeasible?
The problem with that, on paper, it definitely makes sense. But I think from a reality perspective, you're going to have to start coming up with some kind of licensing, aren't you? Some licensing qualification, which will involve training. And the problem with the thing with flying is that, and you know this, Peter, as well as an instructor, to teach one thing, it relies on a foundation of knowledge below it. So you'll start talking about something, but then you'll kind of need to know the other stuff below that to make sense. And to know the other stuff, you've now got to suddenly start doing all your ATP, your pilot theory tests, or so the more basic flying. So you're telling them to do this, to descend or decelerate, but they won't have any principles of flight knowledge or any of the limitations of the aircraft. So I think as much as that in an ideal world would make sense, I think the amount of training that those cabin crew would need to do probably wouldn't be dissimilar to some of the training you'd have to do if you're a pilot anyway, unless, what are your thoughts?
It's but I mean, this is probably one of the most common questions that we get when we talk about piloting capacitation. What about if both pilots goes? Is there anyone on board who can land the aircraft? Right. I have even done videos. I did one with Tom Scott where I talked him down, which was a really interesting experience. But here I'm going to come with a nugget of knowledge that I don't think that you've heard before.
Go on.
In Spain, when you want to become a flight attendant, you need a flight attendant license. A national license, or at least it used to be that. Probably might have changed with the EASA, but when my wife, Sandra, she actually trained to become a flight attendant, not just for a specific airline, but generally. And she had to go through the equivalent of PPL theory to do so.
I did not know that.
She did aircraft general, she did meteorology, she did all of these things. So she actually, they had actually taught about that. So that's why, like, I can talk to her. She understands everything that I say because she has that background knowledge. Now, I'm not sure that it had something to do with incapacitation. I don't think so. She definitely didn't get any practical hands-on flight training, but they did get the theory behind it, which would make it. I mean, it makes sense to a certain extent because they will then understand the background of what we're doing. They will feel turbulence and understand what it is. They will understand what bad weather is and why that poses a problem. But in this case, it would also help, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that certain things would be a good idea to teach the flight attendants. Like, how do you move the seats? How do you trigger the radio?
Yeah.
What's a headset? How do you speak on the radio to give information out and to receive information? Right?
Yeah.
Because even though what you say is correct, that for them to be officially be able to fly the aircraft, it would require an enormous amount of both training and certification. Having someone in there that in a catastrophic situation where we've lost both pilots and there's nothing else, there is someone who at least have the knowledge to get this information out and to do some very basic things or understand some very basic things.
Yeah, I think the way that it potentially would work, forget licensing and certification, would be have that basic knowledge of it, but then they're trained in the autopilot. They're trained in what it is, how it works, what the buttons do, because pretty much every airliner now can do an auto land, subject to the weather being, I say good enough. I mean, in the sense that there's not massive crosswinds or wind shear or something like that. But if they can know how the radio works, get a call out, inform air traffic control, they've still got to, whether they delegate that, there's maybe a background system in place where there's people on the ground that can look at the weather and NOTAMs and in the surrounding area and go, you're going to Frankfurt. So they can then set that up in the FMC. They can initiate a descent, know what buttons to press to program the computer to do an auto land. You could argue it's better than nothing, isn't it? I mean,
like I said,
the alternative.
I did this with Tom Scott.
Yeah.
And he, being a fantastic YouTuber but not a fantastic pilot, had no idea. As in zero. He had been in a light aircraft before for making some kind of video, but it has nothing to do with the 737.
No.
And the way that I did it was that I had him in a full flight simulator, on motion, everything. There was only him and the person who was filming in the simulator. And I was out in a briefing room, right? So I couldn't see what he was doing. The only thing that I had was an instructor station that gave me basically a radar picture. Yeah. Right, that's what I had. And then I had a mock-up, like a paper tiger of the cockpit in the briefing room. So I talked him through it. The key here was, can he communicate? Because without communication, it is impossible.
Doesn't work.
Can he control himself so that he doesn't panic? And even though he was in a simulator and he knew it, that panic came.
He looked stressed.
Yeah, he got stressed because things start to accelerate and things happen. But if you can control those things, then you can tell someone to like, tell me what you see in front of you. All right. Can you tell me if this light is illuminated? We will know what that light means. Right. You have the autopilot engaged. The auto throttle is engaged. We're fine. Now set a lower altitude. That's, right. Turn this knob until the altitude comes down to this value. Done. There's a button next to it that says LVLCHG, level change. Press it. And now we know, you and I, we know that the aircraft is now going to start descending. Yeah. And then what I found was really the challenge there was to tell him to anticipate what was going to change so it didn't scare him.
Yeah, okay.
Because it was like, okay, when you press this, the aircraft is going to start pitching down and the thrust will come off. It's going to sound different. That's normal. Expect it. Because if it does, and things just start moving as it does in the Boeing when the thrust levels moves and stuff, it can terrify you, especially if you feel like, oh, we're going down, So the key was just to have him try, to fly him down on radar vectors a while until you had him down at the altitude that you wanted, and then start to slowly reduce speed, step by step, get the flaps out, make sure that he had every button engaged for the auto land, just like you said. Once you had that done, and the auto brake is set, the gears down, he's locked in, the aircraft will not only land, but it will stop on the runway as well.
Yep. Yeah.
So there was some things that you had to like, when you come down, you're going to have to steer. If the aircraft starts going to the right, you have to press the left pedal. But we did the auto land almost flawlessly. That was fine.
Yeah.
Now, we also tried it with disconnecting. And that was an absolute horror show. Right. But it was interesting. So to answer that question, this is probably the longest answer that we've ever given so far. But I think that there is some idea. Like I think, for example, that it would be good to have when someone becomes a purser, to try to schedule them for sitting in on an LPC or a training day.
Yeah.
They can even be the ones that then interact as cabin crew when we train, that we interact with the cabin crew. So they will hear what we say in an emergency, how we say it, and also then get a little bit of instruction, like, you see he's using the radio now, this is the push the talk button and stuff. I think it wouldn't hurt.
No, I agree with you. And I think the reason it hasn't been implemented is it's probability against cost, isn't it? Because the chance of having two pilots incapacitated and that having to happen is when does that happen? I mean, it's incredibly rare. I mean, and you can't make anything 100% safe, can you? If you could argue, you could put ejector seats in airliners, so people could eject out, but it's cost versus probability, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that the probability of that being required versus the costs involved in the certification, it probably will never happen.
Yeah, but just wait until we go down to single pilot system.
Wow. Once you go down to that one, then it's different.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's the thing. What I think everyone needs to understand, that in aviation, we always come up against the economic reality of things. We obviously, safety is paramount. It's the first thing that you will see in any operations manual, that our aim is to conduct our air transport safely.
Yep.
That is the first thing that every airline will put. Right. Yeah. But there's a cost to everything. And there is sometimes you do need to make these kind of comparison about what do we need to do and versus what can we do.
Yeah.
This is a classic question. Like, people always ask me, why, if the flight data recorder, the black boxes always survive a crash, why isn't the whole aircraft built as a black box? And the answer to that is that it would not fly.
No.
Right. You can't build an aircraft like that.
No.
So you unless you want it driven by a nuclear reactor, it's not going to happen. So yes, that means that we now have to start taking away stuff, right? So this is how the whole world works.
Everything,
everything works like this. So you can always say, well, there should have been, we should have had 2 pilots and then 15 pilots sitting in the back.
Yeah, why not 20?
And at what point do you stop? At what point is the redundancies enough, basically?
Yeah, that's it. Exactly.
Cool. Good. That was a great question, though. So Kevin comes. Well, actually, we take a question from someone else first. So Mark, also from Patreon, is asking, given the potential for ATC communications radar issues in the United States, should interim procedures be developed and or contingency clearances be issued?
So what he's saying there, in the event of a loss of comms, you do this.
Yeah.
Is that what he's saying? Yeah. Well, there kind of is, isn't there? That we do have a loss of comms procedure. I mean, I guess he's sort of referring to more specific, that if this outage happens again, everybody kind of does this. But we do have the loss of comms. People are trained in it. I know it's not a particularly fun thing to do, but if a loss of comm, and we kind of touched on this last time, didn't we? That if we do lose comms, we can't raise another aircraft or a ground station. We will revert to basic procedures. Yeah. Anything else you can add into that, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is that we do this all the time. Like NOTAMs is that. The NOTAMs that will come out, which is notice to airmen, is instructions about potential issues on an airport. So if there is, for example, issues with radar coverage or issues with ATC coverage or whatever, there will be a NOTAM issued so that the pilots that's flying in know that this has happened before. And in many cases, it will also come with, in case this happens, revert to this frequency or whatever. So I would be very, very surprised if there isn't already.
Yeah, it's a very good point he makes. But yeah, I think it's already looked after.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, should we take one more?
One more, let's do it.
One more. Right, Alex Cowley comes with a little bit of criticism here. One thing you didn't cover is that when pilot flying briefs pilot monitoring, they're also briefing themselves. As a software engineer, I know that forcing myself to actually vocalize my plans can show remarkable holes in my thinking. I think that having a fellow pilot alongside and thinking about how you ensure that they know what your plans are makes your plan better. With good CRM, a two-person crew is better than the sum of its pilots or the pilots.
Yeah. What?
That's more of a statement than a question. But I can only agree. I mean, how do you do? Like when you do a brief, what's the purpose of your brief?
Yeah, he's absolutely right. And it's something that we train even in a pilot incapacitation, is that the pilots stick to the standard briefing structure, because we have a standard way of briefing and we stick to that and we brief ourselves, because he's absolutely right that we're briefing when I'm setting up for an approach and I'm briefing it. It's in filling in all the gaps. I know exactly what we're going to do. I'm telling how we're going to do it, and we stick to that plan. But do it, brief yourself, and it works in everyday life as well as in flying.
Yeah,
but 100% right.
Yeah, no, probably the best example of this is in case of a pilot incapacitation, because what we teach then is for the remaining pilot to do a briefing.
Yeah,
as in to follow that same, like you mentioned, the same standard briefing format, to make sure that when you brief, you brief yourself, even though it might feel really silly. The only one that's going to be in the cockpit is going to be potentially a flight attendant that's looking after you to make sure that you don't get sick. So it feels silly, but you need to do it, because a great example is, for example, when we brief, we set our minimums, right? Yeah. So on the 737, I say, okay, so the minimum for this approach is going to be 442 feet, and then you set it. Now, you set it individually, each pilot does, but if there's a pilot incapacitation, you will still make sure that the other person sets it. So in this case, it will remind you to set it on the captain's side. If you're the first officer, it's going to remind you to set it. And if you don't, right, if you don't follow this briefing and you just set the minimum up quietly for yourself, well, then what's going to happen is that on the captain's side, it's going to be, at least in our airline, the minimum flap retraction altitude set in the minima selector from the previous departure. Which means that, or it could be at least, which means that the call out, the minimum call out, is based on the captain's side, whatever is set there. So you're now coming in potentially in bad weather, single pilot by yourself, taking the flaps, and all of a sudden you get plus 100, 1,000 feet higher than you should.
Yeah.
Minimum. Yeah. And then you have to, you know that it's wrong, but now you're not going to get those call-outs when you get down. So this is a great example of why we always brief, because you pick that up when you do it.
Yeah, you do. And there's loads of little things that you can go through on the arrival, the approach, whatever it might be. If you just think, I'm just going to set the basic bits up and not brief, you're going to miss it. Yep. So, yeah, I'm a big advocate of that. And he's 100% right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of covers it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I reckon.
Any plans for the coming week?
Shooting a Mentor Now video, possibly.
Nice. That's what I want to hear.
But yeah, no, we've got a few days off now, so yeah, looking forward to a bit of downtime as well. How about you?
Yeah, I'm going down to Spain to my mother-in-law.
Nice.
Because we live up in Andorra now, but we go
Yeah.
down every 2 weeks or so to visit her for the
Nice.
weekend. And the weather is going to be. I mean, finally the summer has arrived. It snowed up in the mountains last week. Like in middle of May, it was snowing in Andorra, and it's been cold. But now, today, it's going to go up to like 27 degrees. And down in Spain, it's going to be over 30 degrees during the weekend. So I'm looking forward to that.
Nice. It's funny. I was flying over you yesterday, coming back from Ibiza, and I looked down. I could see the valley of Andorra. And the sun was shining, but there was snow on top of some of the mountains. And I thought, geez, okay, that's
Yeah.
late. Yeah.
Anyway, so on that bombshell, I think it's time to round this up. As always, I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope that you maybe this has sparked some curiosity, brought up some new questions. And if it has, this time, if you're watching this on YouTube, you go down into the comments and you write down the questions that you have or anything that you might think that we should change or include or whatever. We're still new at this. But if you are listening to this, wherever you're listening to it, we have created an email address now, which is captains@mentorpilot.com. So captains@mentorpilot.com. Send your questions to that email and it will come into a box that my crew will go through and we will find and select some good questions for the next episode.
Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure. I'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Take care.